in psychology, we learn about what it means to be human, what it means to function well, what it means to flourish, what it means to not flourish, to not function well, to have dysfunction. So we learn about that, I think, a lot in the secular sphere of psychology. But then I think in the Christian sphere, there's a more rooted sense of who we are, like who God is, who we are. What it means to be a follower of Jesus. And what I realized is that in some parts of psychology, there was kind of an absence of a spirituality or a transcendence or an otherworldly approach. But on the other side, I found in some aspects of Christian faith, it wasn't really true to who we were humanly. And so I actually found both sides had a lack. And to be able to let them contribute to one another was really helpful. And I still find that. I still find often in churches, there's churches that kind of specialize on the spiritual and they minimize the human. And there's a lot of churches now that are maximizing the human and minimizing the spiritual. But true integration, for me, was taking my humanity and my spirituality seriously.
Now, knowing that these are your fields of interest and study, and you've been talking about this and exploring it, and then you yourself have been very open about the fact that you were diagnosed with low-grade depression. So how is that impacting your experience as you process that diagnosis and how to move forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. From a very young child, I had this sense that I was carrying, and it felt like carrying it, that I was carrying this low-grade heaviness. You know, when you have a low-grade fever, it's not like raging. It's just a little, you can still function, you can still do fine, but you have this low-grade fever. And it wasn't until I went to a psychiatrist and actually had a fair bit of psychotherapy and then was diagnosed medication, I began to realize that part of my journey, not something to run from or not something to necessarily ignore or pretend wasn't there, but my dysthymia, my low-grade depression, is part of who I am. And if I had diabetes, if I needed a knee replacement or I had a sinus infection, I would go for help with that. And the therapy that I've had and the medication that I take has really helped my dysthymia in a very good way. I still struggle with dysthymia, but it's not jeopardizing my life. It's not getting in the way of what I need to do. Even in serving God, it doesn't get in the way. And I think what it reminds me, like I think at the core, we're all vulnerable. And we're all tainted by just being human. And for me, my dysthymia is one aspect of me being tainted, me being not quite perfect, not quite like the Creator. Surprise, surprise. I have liabilities. I have things that I'm falling short on.
No, you're so right. I think we all are dealing with so many different areas of pain and woundedness. And I know you've been on a journey with your daughter as well. Can you tell me a little bit about her?
Yeah, our daughter was born 37 years ago, and she has hydrocephalus and frontal lobe brain damage, and she's autistic and started puberty when she was 2. So the package of things that she brings to the world, a lot of it related to neuroscience and to cognitive issues, it means this, competent, well-trained psychologist has frailty as a dad. I can't fix my daughter. I can't solve all her problems. That's been a profound spiritual lesson for me, that my journey with my daughter is one of presence, one of walking alongside. It's not one of being the sage on the stage. It's not one of providing all the solutions, all the answers. So while a lot of it's been painful for her because she's, the product of some dysfunction in her brain, I think for me what it's done is it's been a humbling experience, but also an experience where I'm invited to be present and be with rather than solve and fix. And there's nothing like that. I think a lot of the parents watching will have that experience too. Most of us want to fix our children and solve our children's problems, but to walk alongside your child that's got chronic issues is a powerful spiritual lesson. So I tell my daughter sometimes I've learned more about God from being in relationship with you than anything else I've learned, including my theological training.
Wow, that's an amazing statement. And I think you're right. I mean, men in particular, right? You want to fix things. That's your job. Yeah. Slay dragons, fix things.
Yeah.
When you see her suffer, what is your understanding of God in that moment?
Yeah. Well, I've read the Bible chronologically, like there was Jesus' birth and his life and his betrayal and the Garden of Gethsemane and then the crucifixion and then the resurrection and then the consummation. But what I try to do is stop at those places in my relationship with God and say, a lot of my parenting journey has been a Garden of Gethsemane. It hasn't been a resurrection story. A lot of my journey has been pain. A lot of and her journey too, not just mine and my wife's journey, but her journey as well. So I think as a Christian, walking alongside somebody who's got pain and is in, has chronic issues they're dealing with, not a crisis, these are chronic issues, you learn that God's promise is not, I will be the fixer of all your problems, I will be the solver of all your difficulties, but God's promise is, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you. And so what I've learned as a dad is that belonging is what matters most. I want to feel like I belong to her. I want her to feel like she belongs to me. And sometimes when we get into the fixing solution game, we forget the belonging and the connection. And it's mutual. Like by some standards, she's much lesser than me, but by other standards, I think I'm much lesser than her.
That's amazing. And I love how you unpack the gifts that pain even has given you. Yeah. You know, you're a trained theologian. I think a lot of us run from pain, especially here in Western society. Yeah. We're not taught a lot about it. We're not always prepared for it. Yeah. How can people watching process pain, whether it's mental illness or a situation with someone they love or a situation in their own life? Yeah.
Well, I love Genesis 6:6. I love it in the sense that I find it the most confusing verse in the Bible. God regretted that he had made people, and his heart was filled with pain. And I read that verse, Genesis 6:6, and I think, as a dad, I understand that verse. Like, God was in pain as our father when he saw what his children had done, when he saw the pain and brokenness they were in. His heart was filled with pain. When I see Jesus' agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, I feel like that's a Jesus I can follow as somebody who's got my own brokenness and my parenting. I look at when they came and told Jesus that John the Baptist had died, and that lovely little phrase, Jesus went off by himself. Like, obviously a good friend, somebody that in utero, there was some communication with him and John the Baptist, and he went away and had that experience of sadness. So it's given me an understanding of God, I think, that God is in our pain and God is with us in our pain and isn't always extracting us from it. We don't always triumph over it. We're not always victorious over it. I think sometimes some of us are given parts of life that are not crisis-oriented, they're chronically oriented. And I think, some crises can go away quickly, but chronic pain needs someone who's present, right? Because in chronic pain, we feel isolated. We feel alone. We feel like, who's with me in this? Like, my journey as a dad, I've been in this 37 years. Like, people can be with you in a crisis, but can they be with you? And that's God's promise. He never slumbers. He never sleeps. He's present in the chronic, even though the chronic may not go away.
Wow. And I think when we take that and apply it to a mental health lens in the church, it's not always trying to fix people there either, right? Yeah. How do we apply that?
Yeah. Well, I think because sermons are our major mode of communication in church life, and, we all listen to sermons on Sunday or give sermons on Sunday, I think there's a sense in which the sermon sometimes runs the risk of not knowing the stories on the other end. Like, sitting in that congregation or 150 people or whatever it is, they all have a story. And so when we're preaching a sermon, we need to remember that this passage of Scripture and this theological construct we're kind of unpack is being heard by people with different stories. And so if somebody's talking about, isn't it amazing, children are a gift from God, and how amazing parenting is, there'll be some people sitting there that are struggling with infertility. There are people struggling there who've got a problem child. There are people struggling there who've had a child that's taken their own life. So we need to preach and teach with a recognition of the stories that may be there, and be careful not to individualize these sermons so much that people feel re-traumatized when they're listening to a sermon.
That's a word of wisdom. And, you talk about having a narrative grid for Christian ministry. Is that kind of what you mean when you talk about the power of encompassing everyone's story?
Yeah, I'm impressed, Cheryl, in the Gospels that Jesus didn't preach a bunch of sermons. what he did was had conversations with people, and they told stories and he told stories. And some of the stories Jesus told, the people who heard them didn't even understand them. They were confused by them. And he spoke in riddles and he spoke in parables and he used funny metaphors at times. But it's a story dialogue. So story is part of what we need to do. Like even the work you do, a lot of your work is listening to people's stories. And there's something powerful as your listeners watch that. Hearing stories is really what the Bible is about. I mean, the Bible in many ways is a book of stories. They're true stories, but they're still stories. And I think concepts are very much an end, whereas story is ongoing, right? There's something ongoing about story that makes us more connected and gives us a greater sense of belonging. If you know my story, you know me. If I know your story, I know you.
That's so wise. I really love one of your recent books. I have to shift gears for a minute here. You called it Thank You, I'm Sorry, Tell Me More, How to Change the World with 3 Sacred Sayings. And this is a little bit also about how to open up people's hearts. Can you unpack those 3 phrases a little bit more?
Yeah, I think right now in this present cultural moment, we've lost a sense of gratitude and we're very much into entitlement. So I'm not thankful for you. I just believe you need to do this because I'm entitled for it. So I think the antidote to a culture of entitlement is gratitude, and the best way to express gratitude is thank you. I think we're also living in a culture of victimization, where I don't take any responsibility for what I've done wrong. I just blame my parents, my background, my history, my church, Christians, whatever. I'm always victimized by everything. And in a culture of victimization, we need more remorse. We need more repentance. I need to say to you, like Cheryl, in that interaction we had last week, I'm sorry for what I said. And I don't want to blame. I don't want to do a but. I'm sorry, but.
I'm sorry for what I said, but you said blah,
yeah,
blah, blah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what I want to do is speak into that culture of victimization with an expression of remorse. And the tell me more phrase is we're in a culture where everyone wants to tell their own story, right? Like, you need to hear my story. This is my story. This is my experience. This is my lived experience, which is great. But if all I do is tell you my story, I don't say to you, tell me more. I don't ask you to tell me more. So my little title of that book, Thank You, I'm Sorry, Tell Me More, How to Change the World with 3 Sacred Sayings, is basically to say to everybody, not just Christians, if we said thank you more, said I'm sorry more, and said tell me more, we would be more connected and less fragmented. And even myself using these 3 phrases in the last number of years and writing that book, it's just amazing the things that have opened up. I was at a restaurant and I have this little joke. My friends know this about me. I love dessert. So when the waiter or waitress comes to the table after the main course and says, would you like dessert? I say, is the Pope Catholic? And, just trying to be funny because of course I want dessert. I'm going to have dessert. So this young woman, turns out she was about 19. She said, is he? And I said, what? Is the Pope Catholic? And I said, tell me more. So we had this long conversation for about 20 minutes about religion. And she didn't know who the Pope was. She didn't know what Catholic was. She didn't know what Protestant was. I said, do you have any exposure to the church? None at all. She said, well, why are you here? And I said, I'm doing a Bible conference. What's that? And so we had this amazing conversation just because I said, is the Pope Catholic? She said, is he? And I said, tell me more. Right? And when we do those little phrases of thank you, I'm sorry, tell me more, open up a lot of conversational space that I think brings us closer to one another in a world that's really fragmented right now.
There's so much to unpack there, but I think the listening piece too, the tell me more. I have a friend who's an executive coach, and he says, sometimes I feel like people pay me just to listen to them because nobody listens anymore.
Yeah.
What is the power of allowing somebody to genuinely unpack their story without judgment or interrupting or, rushing to critique them?
Yeah. Well, I think, here I would go back to my theological convictions. Like, if we're creating the image of God, there's a certain dignity in who we are. So if you say to me, do you have any children? I say, yeah, I have a 37-year-old daughter. And then you just go along about your day and never say, tell me more. But if you say, tell me more, and I tell you the richness of that experience and the complexity of that experience and the pain for her and the struggle for my wife and myself, that gives you much more connection with me and gives you a sense of understanding the complexity which is my life. And there's a dignity in that. as somebody created in the image of God that will draw me closer to you because you want to know who I am.
Ooh, I think that's a really good thought to end on. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for your time and sharing just a little bit of your wisdom with us.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. I enjoyed being with you.
Thanks.